Your organization probably has a well-being program. Maybe it is a meditation app, maybe it's a mental health days, maybe it is an employee assistance line, a resilience workshop, or a Friday afternoon yoga session that nobody goes to because they are all in back-to-back meetings. And yet your people, your employees are still burning out. They are still quietly disengaged. They are still carrying home a weight that no app, no workshop, and no Pizza Friday is going to fix. Here's a question nobody's asking. What if the problem was never your people? What if it was always the work itself? Not the volume, not the deadlines, the actual design of the work, how it is structured, how it is led, how it distributes energy and autonomy and meaning. What if every well-being program you have ever launched was treating symptoms while the system kept producing the damage? My guest today has spent 2 decades studying exactly this. Dr. Kat Page is an organizational psychologist, leadership partner at Pymany, and the author of this excellent book called Good Work, Transform Your Work from the Inside Out. She has worked with leaders from mining sites in the Andes, close to home, to hospital wards in Melbourne to boardrooms in Sydney. And her argument is as simple as it is radical. Stop fixing workers, start fixing work. Today, we are challenging the entire premise of corporate well-being. We are asking whether the wellness industry is actually giving organizations permission to avoid the real problem. We are exploring what changes when you measure performance by energy instead of hours. And we are getting practical. What a leader who designs good work actually does differently, and what a middle manager with limited power can change starting this week. Kat, welcome to the Growth Hacking Culture Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited by your introduction, and I'm just, a guest. What a great intro. Thank you.
I was fascinated by the book because your book opens with a powerful premise. We are facing an epidemic of burnout, loneliness, and quiet despair at work. Not because people are weak, but because our systems are stretched and outdated. And I share that opinion. That's a direct challenge to how most organizations think about the problem. What made you decide to point that finger at the system instead of the individual?
Great question to start off with. So I would say in a nutshell, and then I'll unpack this for you in a bit more detail, is probably two things. One is the evidence supports this approach. And I'll unpack that shortly. But also I think personal experience has also given me this view. So if I unpack that a bit further, so I'm a psychologist, as you mentioned, and I've been working in this space since 2005, where I first started looking at happiness. And in my early days in this space, I was actually looking at it more at the individual level. So I did then what many psychologists still do, which is looking at the individual and how I can help them be more resilient, more mindful, help them with recovery. And I still think there is a place for that. And I still think those skills matter. In fact, many people would say they matter even more now than they did. But over time, what I've learned, both by getting to know the literature further, because I followed this interest in happiness as it connects to work pretty much throughout my whole career, but I've always looked at it from different angles. So after looking at happiness studies, I actually started working in public health. And in public health, what I learned and discovered was that work is a really powerful social determinant of health. And the evidence is really strong when you look at it to suggest that when the work is broken, and actually, by the way, a poorly designed job is worse for your mental health than not having a job at all. So we have evidence to suggest, because unemployment's already terrible for your health and mental health, having a poorly designed job or really toxic job is actually even worse than unemployment, which is really saying something. But we know that certain characteristics of the work environment, like the combination of really high workload and demands and the absence of control, so feeling relentless workload without feeling like you have any say, like feeling quite helpless to be able to manage that workload, that results in what we call job strain. And when job strain is present, you more than double the risk of depression. It also puts you at risk of cardiovascular problems and a whole host of other things. So the evidence is really clear from a public health and epidemiological perspective. But I also experienced it for myself. And I found that early in my career, I was helping people one by one. But when we take this approach, when we fix work, not the worker, we can actually benefit so many more people. If you fix the systems, Everyone benefits from that, not just the people who are being harmed or who may be vulnerable in some way. We actually help more people. We help the population. So it's I guess what I'm saying is a population level lever. It doesn't mean that resilience is not important. It just means that we help more people when we fix work, not people.
Kat, you made me think that some years ago I follow an online course. I think it was a lady called Laurie DeSantos about
Yes.
happiness.
Yeah. Happiness researcher. Yeah. World renowned.
Yeah,
Harvard, I
exactly.
think Harvard or Yale. Yeah.
And it was quite amazing because she had like really hard data about what I was suspecting about what is the meaning of happiness. And you have mentioned a couple of things like the fact that we have control on our life influences happiness. But
Mm.
there was also a mention about our expectations. So we are always expecting something that to be happy, but we delay it to a later moment. And that in fact make us unhappy, thinking about happiness when a milestone happens. And you come up with this idea of fixing the system, but it looks like a monster. It's like trying to say, I don't know, it looks so difficult for an individual to say, for instance, oh, war. I don't have to think about it. It's affecting me, but we cannot fix the system. We cannot go to the USA. We cannot go to the Middle East and influence that. So, and you're saying, let's do the work to change the system. Is it what you mean? Is it reducing, mitigating the impact, or is it something else that I haven't understood?
I mean, all of the above in some ways. So I think if we think about people and how they're experiencing the world right now, and we're feeling it down under, in Australia, I think in some ways we're not as badly affected, but of course we're still affected by what's happening globally. There's so much happening in the world that feels like it's outside of our control. And what I'm noticing in people is this feeling you could be forgiven, like we're feeling a bit hopeless. And you can understand why people are feeling this lack of agency and this sense of hopelessness, because there are so many things that affect our well-being that we can't change, we can't influence. Work, the reason why I focus on work is because I can't change all that stuff. And that stuff actually is literally out of our control. We can't even, and most of us can't even influence that. But work actually is something that we can fix. Work is a powerful determinant of mental health, and it is something that we do have control over. And when I say we, of course, I mean the people who are in charge of organizations, who actually design organizations, of course, they have a inordinate amount of control, a huge amount of control. But even we as individuals have a lot of control over things, and we can craft things and we can design things to be more in line with our mental health. We can make work better for ourselves. We can't fix everything, of course. So I wouldn't want to suggest that individuals can't do something, that they should just wait for the system to be fixed, because that's not a powerful message. It's not a hopeful message. I think the hope for me in this book is giving people a sense of agency by arming them with information and tools so that they know what good work looks like, and that hopefully they're empowered to seek that out for themselves. And if you're a leader, fantastic. Seek it out for yourself. And while you're at it, create systems that are good for people. So I hope that the message in this book is one of hope, is one of agency, is one of control, because as you have rightly stated, that's a critical part of happiness and well-being, is that sense of agency and control.
I have the impression that in your book, we go beyond just having the hope of changing. I think that there is already like a recipe to start redesigning this work. And you argue that this psychological harm at work is something that is preventable because it's the outcome of poor job design, not just an individual just failing. And that's bold, I must say. What evidence do you have about that? And why do so many leaders still default to our people need to be more resilient, be
Mm.
stronger? I still remember one of my early bosses telling me that I needed to have a thicker skin. What the hell? I was young and I still feel it. When I think about it, I still shiver.
Yeah. No one has a thick skin when they're young. Like, we just haven't developed the thick skin yet. We're just like little bubs. But if I can just respond to something you said before about the hope, I think to come back to this idea of hope, I think hope is not just about making people believe that tomorrow can be better than today. It's also about creating a pathway for them and showing them how to get there. And I think you're right in saying that my book is more than just trying to instill that optimism. It is also trying to create the blueprint or the pathway there. But to come back to your question around the
Resilience.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, for evidence, for decades, we have been building the evidence. So the work design literature, interestingly, which I talk a lot about in my book, has got about 100 years of history. So we have been slowly building evidence to suggest this for a really long time. But the challenge, I think, has been is that a lot of that evidence has been created by and used by academics and researchers. And sometimes it just stays within the confines of academia. And so lots of academics are having interesting discussions about it, but it's not necessarily trickling into widespread practice. And if you think about most leaders, most of us don't have time nor maybe interest in going into academic literature to find out, what we can be doing better. We learn from the people around us. And so our practice as leaders often is informed by what we see others doing. And so there is this pervasive belief that resilience is important. And it is important because we all become more resilient as we age. That's one of the benefits. There are some benefits. But I think there is a bit of a myth that, or a bit of an unfair expectation that we place on people that they need to be resilient to survive in today's organizations. What I'm arguing is that, why should they have to be resilient to thrive in organizations today? Yes, we can make them more resilient, but why should they have to be resilient? And many of the biggest, most complex organizations are being resilient not to the fun stuff. They're being resilient to the complexity that we've created in organizations. We've made it so bloody tough to get anything done. In organizations, we layer systems on top of systems. We engage in transformation efforts without taking anything away. We duplicate stuff. So most of the time, people are fighting that complexity. That's what they're being resilient to. They're not necessarily being resilient to the good stuff, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Exactly. And you have pinpointed the right the right problem. This is about this complexity that we have created, that the system has created in order to have more control, while the individual wants to have the control
Yeah.
in
Yep.
our side.
Yes.
And that's what it makes us a little bit thriving in the at the workplace.
Yes. Yeah. And that's interesting because the people making those decisions at the top are, firstly, they're the most, they're really far away from the work. So they no longer necessarily have the same experience of what that work actually feels like when you're doing it. And sometimes to make us feel better about things in senior leadership roles, we create systems and processes and we go home feeling like we've had a great day because we created a system and a process. So we tick something off our list. But by us getting control from that action, we actually then take away control from others. And we create environments where people are having to cope with the strategies we've used to make ourselves feel better. So we've created this machine that is not good for humans. So if I can give you an example, I don't know what the public health care system is like so much in Switzerland, but I've got a real passion for first responders. So paramedics, doctors, police officers as well, firefighters. The things you want them to be resilient to are the challenging aspects of their job, which is the patient-centered or the community-centered stuff. You would think that that's where they need to be resilient, and they do need to be resilient for that. But oftentimes their resilience reserves and resources are being used up fighting internal systems that are actually draining them. And so they don't actually they can kind of be resilient to the hard human stuff. What it's hard to be resilient to is stuff that doesn't make any sense. Being overlooked for promotion because you've got a poor boss who feels threatened by you, or by having systems that don't talk to one another, or by having metrics that have been put in place by governments that don't actually really understand the work that you do and don't drive the right behaviors and make things harder and make things take longer. And there's just stuff that they're being resilient to that's not the right use of their resilience. They are the most resilient humans on earth, I tell you. And to tell them they need to be more resilient would be almost offensive, I would say.
You made me think about a comment not so long time ago. I was discussing with a psychologist who used to work for the unemployment office in Switzerland, and he was mentioning some data about how many people are burned out of the advisors for people unemployed. And I was expecting that he was telling me that he believes that it is close to 70% of people who are burned out. And it's not like they have a job that it is very intense. They finish at 5 o'clock. It is finished at 5 o'clock. But the problem is that they feel hopeless that they
Mm.
cannot really fulfill their duty, their purpose to help someone because they only have tool number one, tool number two, and a limited time to interact with people. And that produces this sense of burnout. They are not working like in corporate America, 12 hours a day. No, they are working 8 hours, but it's not the time that burns them out. It is the fact that they don't have any impact and they
Yes,
know they are doing bullshit. The process doesn't work
absolutely.
like that.
I think you are 100% right. So what you're describing there is a type of moral injury that happens where people aren't able to help the people that need them because of problems that are outside their control. So that's it's the lack of control there and the not being able to fulfill their purpose and help people. That is exactly, it's causing the injury. It's not necessarily about the work hours. It's a moral
Yes.
injury.
Yeah. You mentioned something interesting is that back in the days, and when I say back in the days, it's maybe less than 10 years ago, the research about what is happening in our brain, what is happening, purpose, and all the stuff was there, but in the academical side. Suddenly, let's say approximately 10 years ago, this information become a little bit more accessible for people. It wasn't the crazy professor in a university that nobody knows that was having the publication. No, it was in books, and there is a lot of books about organizational design, about human psychology, organizational psychology, that makes it easy to understand. And I'm thinking, at the same time, in Switzerland, there is more than 50% of human resources people who have a degree in psychology, and nevertheless, they come and they implement bullshit solutions like the one in the wellness industry. So what I was wondering is the corporate wellness industry essentially a way for organizations to look like they care without actually changing anything? So a psychologist will know that this is not a solution, that it is healing the pain, maybe reducing the symptoms, but it is not actually having impact. So how
Yeah.
does it come that human resources understanding a little bit more of human behaviors still implement this type of nonsense?
Yeah. Gosh, it's so tricky. So, I mean, what I can't judge is what people's intent would be in those scenarios. And I imagine there'd be a full range, a full spectrum there. But I am going to reveal myself as an absolute optimist here and say that the end of the day, I do believe that most people want to do a good job. Like I do hope that people who are, whether they're trained psychologists or HR people, that they desire to do a good job. What happens when you are, treating someone one-on-one? It's so, in some ways, so much easier to tailor your advice, and you have full control in some ways over the advice and the interventions you give. You can't control whether or not they'll do it, of course. But even then, it's so hard to change behavior, right? Even one-on-one, trying to get someone to quit smoking, for example, really, really hard. So if you think about in an organization, the complexity increases, I don't know, let's say tenfold for argument's sake. And so when you get into an organization, you might know what the right thing to do is, or think that you know what the right thing to do is. But whether or not somebody chooses to implement that, it's not just one other person. There's like dozens of other people that you have to win over. And I would imagine that many people try for many, many years to try and get the right things to happen, but there's just too many stakeholders to have to convince. And maybe at the end of the day, they go, well, something is better than nothing. So
Yes.
that's my hopeful view. I also know from having worked in this space myself that sometimes influencing large organizations follows a bit of a pathway, like a bit of a maturity model. So what I have discovered is that you can't say there are 4 levels of maturity in this space, which I think there are about 4 levels of maturity. I can't walk into an organization and say, like, here's level 4, go away and do level 4, because they haven't built the internal knowledge and capability and buy-in that's required to get to that sophisticated level. All of us have to start at level 1 in most organizations, which is that more individual focused, the employee assistance lines, the yoga, the mindfulness, all those things you've mentioned. They're not good things to do to start the journey. We just know that they don't change organizational outcomes. We know that for a fact. And there's been evidence to suggest they don't actually improve mental health outcomes. But what they might do is start to create some internal goodwill, capability, start the narrative so that you can then build on that foundation to then work towards what you know is the right thing to do. But you have to take people on that journey, and that's really hard. See, I'm an
That's
optimist.
Me too. Sometimes I try, and I think we
It's hard
age.
not sometimes. It is, I mean, I'm sure I think there would be organizations where that's not true, though. I know that there are organizations that aren't necessarily adopting that approach. And we know with employee engagement surveys that sometimes it's about the way to shift the dial on them sometimes is to make a big song and a dance and a marketing campaign around the things you're doing over here. And so then people go, I need to answer this question. What have I seen lately? Yeah, we had that thing. So we had that thing. And therefore, when you ask me that thing, then I'm going to give a more positive score. So there is something that there are stuff you can do to make people respond positively about stuff. So cynically, that I would say that. And I have seen that happen.
Me too. Me too. I still remember clearly because I was involved in that beautiful culture survey where the outcomes were highly manipulated. So in order to don't change anything.
Yeah.
I have to say when your book has a little bit of cues that a little bit, how do you say, I'm going to use my language. Punk on the sense like I want to destroy the system at one moment. Let me give you an example.
Vivian
Or
Westwood.
reconstruct it. Yes. You mentioned a provocative question in your book. What if performance was measured by energy, not hours? Wow. That's
Mm.
a big, bloody statement. So tell me more about that. Unpack that for us. What changes when organizations start thinking about energy instead of time?
Who would say such a silly thing, huh? Who would say this? I would say that's almost a bit more hipster than it is, Vivian Westwood sort of. I think of Vivian Westwood when I think of punk, she was just like.
Yeah.
So where I was coming from with this idea is that much of the way that we measure performance today goes back to more of an industrial era. It almost goes back to scientific management. So Frederick Taylor working in factories, you probably could measure performance by output in hours. And maybe watching people in those styles of jobs, maybe that did mean they were more efficient. Maybe they did produce more things. So I think that might have made sense back then. In today's environments, when you think about knowledge work, performance isn't about hours. Performance isn't about sitting at your desk for as long as you possibly can, hoping that something brilliant will come out of your brain. Or my pet hate, Ivan, is people spending 3 weeks on a PowerPoint pack. So the hours, we've invested the hours. I've worked in professional services, right? Like I've done those hours and I do a mean PowerPoint pack. I do a great PowerPoint pack that spent hours and hours and hours in it. But is it actually changing anything? Is it actually making things better? Is it actually achieving an outcome? Not necessarily. So hours themselves is not a predictor of performance. So I think where we're going in the future, given that outcomes like success in the new era, in the AI era, I think is more about being original. So creativity, complex problem solving, making connections with people, being able to kind of have the wisdom to spot, who are the people I need to bring together to solve this problem? And actually, what is the problem? There's this sense-making capability that I think is going to become so critical for leaders in the future. Like, how do we make sense of all of this data that we have? That's not necessarily about the hours that you're spending. Sometimes you actually need to have time out of work to actually come up with your best ideas. If you think about it, like, where do the best ideas occur to us? Often it's not when we're trying to force them. And actually trying to put in more hours sometimes is the worst thing we could possibly do. That we actually need to have recovery and we need to actually invest in our cognitive, social, psychological capital or our energy to then be able to make our brain work in a way that actually is going to create better performance. So that's really what I mean. And if I can give you an example, the organization I work for now, so I work in advisory or consulting, we don't track utilization, which is pretty radical for a consulting firm. We're only small. I've worked in many organizations where utilization is tracked, but I feel, and this is case study of one, that my performance is far better in this organization because I'm not worried about somebody watching my hours or watching how much money that I make. They actually want me to be my best. They want to actually unlock the unique superpowers that I have and actually help me to harness that. And that's why they've hired me, is because of that, not because I'm going to put in X number of hours. And I think it's getting better out of me because I'm not focusing on that. I'm focusing on success. I'm focusing on the things that really matter as opposed to being worried about, oh, is somebody watching me tracking my hours? And there's this norm of reciprocity that happens as a result. When people aren't tracking you, when people do right by you, you want to give back to them. And that's called the norm of reciprocity. And all humans have that tendency that if you do good by me, I want to give back to you in some ways through my effort. And so I probably do work more hours in some way, funnily enough. But I don't feel like I have to. I'm intrinsically motivated.
If you had told me 5 years ago, let's start measuring energy, I would have told you that that is not possible. Like, it's not realistic. You need an army to understand we are spending our time, if it has an impact in the organization and so on. But I have the impression that today with AI, we can. And in fact, the systems are already there. There is close to 80% of organizations using Teams. Teams is tracking every single shit that we do.
It absolutely is.
And it could understand, if it wasn't a Microsoft product, the impact of things that.
Well, they already are. They already are. So even last year in 2025, Microsoft released a report. It doesn't quite answer the question here, but it sort of does. It released a report analyzing, like, I don't know, I'm going to say millions of pieces of data, because it has, as you say, it tracks everything and has so much information about us. And they found that on average, people were getting interrupted every 2 minutes. So if you're getting interrupted every 2 minutes, like, your energy is not going to be great, because you're going to be distracted. You're going to be trying to multitask, which is not a real thing, by the way. Our brains cannot multitask. What we're doing is cognitive switching. So we're actually not focusing. And if we're not focusing, particularly in that mid-morning period, which is our sweet spot, if we're not focusing then intellectually we don't have energy. So it almost becomes a proxy for energy, because we're getting interrupted, particularly during the hours of the day where we're at our most productive from an energy perspective, right? Because you're in your sweet spot, producing work in your optimal time of the day. You start then interrupting everyone else because you're trying to get stuff done, right? So that's probably why people start pinging each other and emailing, and because we're getting stuff done, but I'm being productive, but I'm actually then just distracting you. So I actually think we need to be protecting maybe not measuring energy so much as protecting time for focus, because we know that's really important, and also protecting time for connection, which in itself creates energy. So it's less about how do we measure that energy, which is probably quite provocative, more about thinking about energy as this resource that we need to be better at tapping into, and thinking about how to use that really wisely, how to give it to people, how to not drain it, and how that is going to be our biggest source, I think, of sustained competitive advantage in the AI era.
Yep. I'm trying to figure out what a leader who wants to design good work would actually do. Can you just tell me the image that you have of this leader, that during the day, what is he doing in order to put the theory in practice? What is he doing actually, the actual behavior, not what is he thinking? So what is he doing in order to design good work?
Yeah. So that's a really practical, tangible question. And I can answer that because I have leaders like that. So I can tell you exactly what they do. So I think for starters, they really know what good work looks like for their people, because it does look slightly different for everyone. But we do know that for most of us, even if we are different, good work means that we have clarity about what's important, that we feel competent, that we feel that we're growing, that we feel that we're making a contribution, that we feel connected, and that we feel that we're cared for as human beings. So we know that that's what good work looks like for most people. So therefore, I think what these leaders would be doing is that they would be clarifying what's really important around here, helping people to clarify priorities and go, no, that's not important. You just keep doing that. That's great. They would spend less time trying to motivate people, which we can't do. We can only create the conditions for people to motivate themselves, right? So therefore, what they're doing is not trying to motivate people. They're trying to remove barriers or friction. So they might be saying to people, how can I help? What do you need? What's draining you at the moment that I can get rid of? They might be saying no to unnecessary work. Like, no, I don't need a 10-page PowerPoint for that. It's just an email. My boss routinely, he doesn't even like to be called my boss. My colleague, who happens to manage me and be more senior than me, jokes that when I joined from the corporate world into this organization, I had to go on a corporate detox because I wanted to create slides for everything. And he's like, stop creating slides. Nobody wants slides. It's just an email. It's just a phone call. You don't need to do all of that stuff the corporate world has taught you that you need to do. So he helps me say no to that stuff. It's about also he or she's creating space for recovery. Like, I know you've had a big week. Just take Friday off. Don't worry about it. Just take half a day off and giving you that space. They would be involving you in decisions that affect your work. Hey, this is coming up. I don't exactly know what the outcome is. Let's talk about it. I would love to hear your perspective on it. They're really actively looking for duplication and stuff that we can get rid of. So I think as leaders, it's less about what we add. We're adding clarity, great. Getting rid of stuff that's just unnecessary, stripping it back, removing silly things that we do, removing rework, removing anything that's going to require duplication. And sometimes that means slowing down to speed up in order to make sure we get the right work defined rather than wasting time on stuff that's maybe isn't necessary or maybe isn't needed. So I think they're sort of saying, what does good work look like for you, and what's getting in the way of you doing that work, and how can I help?
Hmm. It looks easy when you say it. Corporate detox is something that we can change. But gosh, it is so difficult. 7 years ago, I decided to go full entrepreneur. So get away from the corporate world. But I brought all my stupid shit with me. This story about doing PowerPoints for everything, even brainstorming in front of a PowerPoint, eh, that doesn't really
Stop
work. But
doing it.
yeah, but it's not that easy. God,
Doing
it
it.
is 20 years of corporate life that where
Oh,
the only way of communicating with a human being was through a 20 pages, 20 slides PowerPoint. You don't get rid of that easily. So it took me time. It also takes time for the standard employee when he has, as you say, the opportunity to change things, especially when they are moving from one position to the other. So they have been doing it in that way in one function. He's moving in another function. He wants to change a couple of things. He wants even to suggest changes to his new boss about how we can redesign work in order to be more impact oriented. It is difficult. We come back to the same way. So because it's easier to keep our the things that we have been completely repeating in our heads and it's anchored in our brain like there is no tomorrow.
yeah.
Is there a way to break it in a quicker manner? Because it takes time.
I think what we're referring to there is it's a dominant logic or a schema that we've
Yes.
developed. And sometimes you first just need to even be aware that it exists, because some of these things are so deeply embedded that we just assume that they are true. Like it's no longer, it feels like an assumption, it feels like fact. So I think then just having the skill to be able to sort of stop and go, okay, what about this approach is an assumption and what is actually fact? And spending more time clarifying up front what actually impact looks like for the other person. So a client, for example, I work with clients every day, as I imagine you would as well. And quite often I think if you hear a little tone in their voice that feels like, oh, they're not happy with something that I've shown them, the response might be to go away and create more to try and make them happy. Whereas what I've learned to do is to actually pick up the phone and sort of say, hey, I noticed a little kind of edge to your voice, or it seemed like you weren't quite comfortable with something. Can I just clarify? This is how I was feeling it, but I just want to test my assumption with you. Is that actually what you were meaning? And oftentimes they're like, oh, no, like it was this. Or actually what's most important to me is just this. And I go, oh, that's fine. Like I can just do this small thing that makes that go away. So I think it's just checking. I think it's knowing that as humans, we are expert storytellers. And where that starts is in our own heads. In our own heads, we create all this meaning, make all these assumptions, build these stories that feel true. So as soon as we know our brains do that, we know to check, like we check with AI, right? Has that just completely made something up? Yes, it has. Where did it learn that from? Well, our own brains do that. So just
Yes.
assume your brain that you are an unreliable narrator of your own life. In the same way that ChatGPT or Claude is also going to be making stuff up, our brains make stuff up. So just check. Don't assume that what you're thinking is fact. Give it another look. Test out the assumptions. Give somebody a call.
You're right that we need to have this awareness about our current patterns so that we start fixing the system. If we want to fix the system, we have to understand that if we are doing something because we brought it from somewhere else or the same company, and I have the impression that the root cause is fear,
Yes.
or at least it was for me back in the days. I was so picky with the PowerPoints because that was the way people was judged, not on the essence of what you are communicating, but on this silly font that you have forgotten in the line number 3. And we were always judged based on the beauty of our corporate slides. And we bring the fear together with us. But as long as you say, we spotted what is the root cause of what it is, then it makes a case for change so that we can start fixing the system because we have contributed to the system by maintaining the
Yeah.
same pattern.
Yeah. So you could say that in some ways we're colluding with the system that we're trying to fight.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think, and the corporate world is full of anxious overachievers. Like it's rife with them. And we worry about not being good enough. Most of us worry about not being good enough. So it's not unusual. You can see how we've got ourselves into this mess. So it's about then how do we unlearn and relearn something different? Change the rules.
Yeah. I have one last question, and it's regarding your book. If every CEO reads one chapter of good work before the next board meeting,
Mm.
which chapter would you put in front of them and why?
That's like choosing amongst my kids.
Yes, Sophia's Choice movie remade.
It's a great movie. Can I say 2? I think
Okay,
okay, yeah.
okay, you are allowed for 2.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank So I would say the case for change in the beginning, I think, sort of sows the seeds for everything that is to come in the book, which is around this idea that work can universally be a public health intervention, and it kind of tries to tackle some of the prevalent or some of the prevailing assumptions that we have about work and try to sort of create a new story. So I think if you're going to read one thing, that kind of has the whole case for change in it. If you're wanting something a bit more tangible around, okay, how do I actually do this? I would say it's then, if you're looking for the more tools than narrative, I would probably go to the chapters on either on fixing work, not people. I can't remember. I think they're up chapters 12. Well, we'll come back to you on that. We'll put it in the show notes. And then there's another one on like redesigning work. Those 2, I think, are good because they get to the root of how we actually influence systems and how we actually, the kind of the nub of work design.
Yeah. That is quite necessary because if you don't know how to influence the system, even if you have the idea, nothing will change ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kat, how can people reach you out asking you about this marvelous impact driven purpose that you have is to change systems in the corporate culture? How can they reach you out and ask you questions? What is the best way?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the invitation. So I think, and I will answer that, but my highest hope for this book is that it creates a movement. And for this book to create a movement, I think I'd love to get it into as many hands as possible because I think it does try to change a really dominant, maybe subconscious paradigm that we have. And I try really hard to provide the tools to do that. So I would love for people to find the book, and you can find it on Amazon, and which is obviously global and in many of the mainstream retailers. But if you're looking to seek me out in particular, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn at Dr. Cat Page. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Substack and Instagram. So they're sort of newer places for me. But again, Dr. Cat Page there. Or you can come to my company website, which is pymany.com.au, or my personal website, which is drcatpage.com. I think I got all those right. Or you
Yes.
can
So I will be,
send a carrier pigeon.
yes, I will be putting all these links below this episode. And it was really nice to speak to you because you have put words into things that I think about, but I don't know how to structure. I don't have any background about on psychology. I am super interested about how the brain works. I'm super interested. Maybe if it started with me because it was about understanding myself the way I think. I always feel that I'm a little bit neurodivergent, so that's why I'm always interested about the topic. Thank you very much for your time. It was wonderful to have you with me.
Thank you for making me feel so comfortable. I do think that makes for a really rich conversation when you have a lovely person like yourself on the other side.
Thank you, Kat. Have a great day.
You too.